Yo, 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 what is going on, COD Familia? It is your boy BN, aka Mr. Kingdom Builder, and today I wanted to talk about one of, if not some of the biggest challenges right now in Call of Dragons that really are affecting the overall quality of life of the everyday player. And we're going to start off by breaking this into two parts. The first part is we're going to touch on some of the drama that is happening in S2-4, which is comprised of kingdoms 30, 35, 37, 39, 45, and 48. Now, some of you may already be familiar, if you are, about the whole TFS jasongee situation. From what we've been allegedly hearing, that there was some accounts that were purchased in the game from the MT Alliance, which is now no longer, and now whether it was jasongee, if it was someone else, regardless of that, right? There was accounts. Someone in TFS purchased an account from someone in MT. And they kind of, what the MT players felt was that it was a hostile takeover, right? It was people that were buying leadership accounts. They immediately got control of the alliance. They could kick everyone. They could leave some people in. They could send messages out. I mean, they could do whatever they wanted at that point. Then they ended up purchasing a few other accounts from what we heard. This was corroborated by a couple sources. And we get to a point where, well, why did they do this, right? What was the whole reason behind purchasing these accounts? Well, from what we heard is that the merged kingdom was either slowing down or just really wasn't having a lot of PvP action going on at the time. So the thought process behind purchasing the account, from what we hear, is that they did it so it could maybe spice some things up. Maybe it could elicit some more PvP action, and then that way they'll be fighting again. I think regardless of what the end reason was, this to me really brings forth a bigger issue with quite a few hurdles. And I want to talk about these specifically because regardless of how you feel about this, right, there was a situation back in Kingdom 2 where one of the more famous, I don't know if I'd say famous, but I would say more well-known player that did something kind of similar to this, except it really wasn't kind of a selling of the account, more so that it was the player just kind of got into a more high-ranking position and was able to do some things, right? This is Lenin, who was there back with TA. We should say the original TA. And I'm forgetting the other alliances that were there at the time because it was escaping me. I know there was like UEH, but I can't remember some of the other big ones that some of the other people that were a part of. Anyways, point being is there was a situation on Kingdom 2 where one of these players got into a high-ranking position and they kind of just switched sides at that point, right? There, from what I recall, there wasn't anything where the player accepted any money, even though it was alleged that they did. And you kind of have this situation where now they're in this position, a little bit more of power with the Alliance, and you could say that kind of turned some tides in their more so war. And this is more than what's actually happening here in S2-4. However, as I alluded to, this brings forward, I think, quite a few challenges in the game. And I'm going to go over these with you, right? So first off, I'm going to show you what we're talking about. So we're going to switch this up, and we're going to go to the right window. And so I'm a big kind of notepad person, right? So let me make sure I can put this up here, right? And then we'll go back here to let me see if I can full screen this, and then we'll bring this back up. So let's start with number one, that I think the area this really affects, which is server population fill, right? A part of why you may feel this way is because there may not be enough activity and or power from some of the other alliances within your merged group that are willing to fight. Now, part of this challenge is due to server population fill. What we mean by that is how new servers are filled up from their as they're being populated before a new kingdom is then released. And we've spoken about this before, where we feel that the best approach really is to allow for a new server to only be triggered once you have, from what we're saying, 7,500 to 10, we're saying 10,000 players that hit level 12. And then you can go ahead and release a new kingdom, right? Like that should be the bare minimum expectation, right, is you got to have 10,000 players hit level 12, and then you can open up a new kingdom. Now, if you want to maybe try and leave it at 7,500 just to see how that works, I'd be fine with that. But I really believe it should be 10,000. Because the challenge right now is that we don't know what the number is that a kingdom has to be populated to, and or if how heavy the factoring is for the first Augerstone chapter to be completed, which is 7,500 players that need to complete reaching level 4. And level 4 doesn't really tell us a lot, right? Because you could hit level 4 within 30 minutes. That's not a difficult challenge to accomplish. And it also doesn't show any form of longevity, right? Any form of you're going to play the game for, or we should say a form of replayability. And so by getting to level 12, even though, yes, this isn't the same as getting to 24, you have to spend more time playing the game to hit level 12. So the more time that you spend playing, the higher level you'll reach, which is a higher percentage chance of kingdoms being filled in a more quality way, right? More qualitative than quantitative. And so personally, I think that needs to be raised. And that's, I think, one of the factors, because if you have kingdoms that are more healthy than healthy with the population, then you have a higher percentage chance of having more overall engaged alliances, stronger alliances, and more active alliances all around. And I think that can then bleed into / transition into having more PvP and merged kingdoms. Number 2, which is alliance over kingdom. This, to me, in my opinion, is one of the most detrimental things that a developer, and that a game really more so as a whole, can come out and say about, really to the community, right? Now, it's not as though the dev / the game is plastering this all over the place, right? But it is something that they have come out and said a couple times, where they are aiming for Call of Dragons to be more alliance-focused over kingdom-focused. The challenge with this, and this is something that it can be difficult to understand if you do not immerse yourself fully in the game. And what I mean by that is in doing everything, right? Not just looking at the game from the outside in, but immersing yourself to play. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to play at the highest level, but you should at least play enough to where you can understand all the different levels of I don't know if I want to say positions, but just positions as fields that you can play in. And I'll give you an example of some things. So one, there's the average, which is the standard of just being a member, being an officer in an alliance, being a leader, being someone who does recruitment for your alliance, being someone who does diplomacy for your alliance, someone who does merge talks with other kingdoms for your kingdom. These are things. Number 2, I'm counting. These are things that are so important to really understanding how a kingdom versus an alliance operates, and that they are all connected. It's not my alliance is separate from the kingdom, even though unfortunately that is, I don't want to say a popular opinion, but is an opinion of, I would just say those who are uninformed or just unaware at the moment. And most of the time this usually happens from either new players or players that have been playing for a while, but just haven't ever really truly immersed themselves in the kind of kingdom-wide approach or kingdom-wide perspective of how to play and or build. And so because of this, you actually have one of the most impactful areas of that's really damaging the game from not only a population, but from a retention and a replayability aspect, or we should say perspective. And that is that when you talk about wanting to be more alliance focused, you are inherently saying, almost indirectly, if not indirectly, that you're basically co-signing mega alliance structures in kingdoms, which means that you're okay, almost you could say insinuating or kind of leading in that direction, just without saying it, that you're okay with the top 1% all going into one alliance and that being the end of it. And the reason why that is detrimental is because we have seen this countless times in Rise of Kingdoms. We've seen this in Infinity Kingdom. We've seen this in other kingdom builders and even in Call of Dragons for the amount of time it's been out so far, which is when you run that style of system in a kingdom where you're just trying to fill in all the best top active players into one alliance, you impact in a negative way the remaining alliances, because then you make it a ladder climbing a race where everyone is just trying to get into the strongest alliance, and if you're not number one, it's basically like if you're not number one, you're last, right? It's that kind of bad. I mean, I'm okay maybe with that in some areas, but not in this area because it is incredibly detrimental. And it is the number one leading cause, I would argue, outside of rogue player activity, of player drop-off when you have this style of system that's being implemented. And so this is why, again, a second reason that really factors into this, of the whole, like, this is the drama that's being started. These are all parts that kind of connect to why you're seeing these types of actions being done, right? When we saw the S2 Lena situation, when we're seeing the TFS situation with jasongee and or others, right, that may or may not be involved in the account purchasing. Then you get to number 3, which is there's no dedicated starting regions. And I'll explain why this is so important. The reason why it is needed to have a dedicated starting region isn't because we don't want early PvP. It's to control your chaos that you could see in your merged kingdom. And I'll give you a great example. For those of you that have ever played Infinity Kingdom, or if you've ever played a game where you go into a KVK or an SVS where you are allowed to attack anyone and everyone from Zone 1, you are basically running the highest percentage chance of killing that KVK for the entire season within the first week. And nobody wants that. What I should say is the majority do not want that. Do the 1%ers want that, who are already T5 and are already max account and they don't really have anything else to do except basically fight? Yeah, I'm sure there's probably a good amount of those individuals, if not maybe all of those individuals that fall into that category, who are thinking to themselves, well, man, all I really have left to do is fight. And there's not really a kind of calm, so to speak, or a patience for the majority of those individuals, right? I'm sure there could be for some. But that is a factor that goes into it, which is that when you don't have a dedicated starting region that basically isolates your home kingdom and other home kingdoms, it makes it difficult for you. Now, bear in mind, the challenge right now is that you are only a very small step above the chaos of allowing free reign or free movement within Zone 1 with the way that Call of Dragons Zone 1s are set up currently for Season 2 and beyond, which is you can still choose whichever zone you want to start in, but you just can't go to an adjacent zone. Okay, well, that's good in theory, but the challenge still remains that you are able to go into any Zone 1 region until you hit the limit cap for that region. So you could have 100 players from each kingdom, arguably, and I'm sure there's a plus or minus here, but go into one starting region. You could have players from every kingdom go into one starting region and just cause havoc. You could have players from 2 starting regions go into the same region and cause havoc, right? There's nothing really stopping that. And that in and of itself, this isn't to say that this happens in every kingdom or every merged kingdom, but it does happen in some/enough for you to really see what the kind of extreme impacts are on the game. But what does this lead to? Do you think that players who go into a new season immediately want to fight within the first week of that new season, which is a brand new map, a brand new experience, a brand new adventure and journey that the players who are playing your game honestly just want to experience? No, it's not. It's incredibly detrimental to the new player experience, right? Why would I want to not be allowed to, or not have the opportunity, I dare say, to experience this new season as much as possible, even though I know that it will eventually get to kind of an all-out chaotic war, right? And you know what? That's okay. But denying people to experience, like at the point right now, you're basically saying that you're okay if players only experience 5% of a new season compared to 90% of a new season. If you polled people and you asked players, hey, would you love just to be able to fight as much as you want, but still be able to play at least 85 to 90% through a season before it all becomes chaos? Overwhelming majority would say yes to that. It's a no-brainer. Because the opposite, or the other side of the fence, is that you're only going to play maybe 5 to 10% of the season, and then you're done. You'll be locked in your zone. You won't be able to go anywhere, or you just may not be able to make it that much farther. Right? That is a negative impact. So the idea of kind of creating the best of both worlds, right, should be present, if that makes sense. Then we get to number 4, which is the maps with too few choke points. there are, I think, not enough choke points on the season maps. And I will give you, I don't know if I can give you an example because I'm not on my other account. I wish I was on my other account to show you this. I mean, Season 1, I think, is a good example of the Season 1 map has a decent amount, but the Season 2 map doesn't really have that many choke points. And I think one of the areas you're seeing is in the Zone 4 region for where the dragon is on the Frost Dragon on Season 2. You have basically a dedicated bridge choke point that splits kind of half the map up. This, to me, is just not the way to go about it. You shouldn't have one singular choke point that's blocking. Right now, if you want to have two or three choke points that are blocking multiple areas, and then maybe at that point it could funnel into a single, give or take. I'm still a little bit more. I still a little bit more like the idea of having two or three choke points here and there, because I think it promotes a little bit more strategy on having to fight on multiple fronts rather than fighting through a singular choke point. Now, am I against there just being a hard single choke point? No, I'm not against that. But if you do not have enough choke points spread out throughout the map, I think that's really when it becomes a detriment, once again, to the game and the player's development and their day-to-day player experience, right? So I think that is really the challenge, is that singular choke points should not really be at the middle of the map. They should almost be on your third or your opponent's third of the region, so to speak, or even closer to your gate, if you will, or close. I don't want to say, like, not to say 10 yards away from the gate, but in that type of a situation where it's not immediately on the 50-yard line, right? To me, that's where you should have like at least two or three choke points, just so you allow for a little bit more tactical and strategy to be applied, right? Then we get to number 5, which is maps not having enough PvP areas. This is something we talked about in a previous video, where we touched on that the way that the Season 2 map is designed is not favorable to the average or just to the player base in general. This isn't to say that the map is awful. It's not to say that the design is horrendous. What it is to talk about is providing constructive criticism on how the map looks. And I will give you an example. Let me see. Can I open up some paint here? Let me do that. So let's open up some paint, and I'm just going to give like a very easy example here, right? So let's say that, can I take this brush? Cool. Let's make this a little thicker than a Snicker, if you know what I'm talking about. Cool. Okay. So let's say, as an example, that, and I'm just going to do probably the worst drawing ever, but let's just say this is like your Season 2 map, right? As an example. So you have your Zone 1 that went a little bit far. Hopefully no one crucifies me over my lovely drawings. Okay, bam. And then you have like your Zone 2, or here's another one. Let's say here's another one, or sorry, for your Zone 1s. And I'm probably not proportionalizing these appropriately. Let's do it like this. So let's just say there. And that probably doesn't look that great either. Okay, whatever it may be. Let's just say these are your... these are your Zone 1s, right? So let's say, let me switch my color. Let's go color 2. And then we'll just, oops. Oh, I forgot. I have to right click for that one. So here's your Zone 1s. Bum, bum. You know what? Let's do it like this. Let's make this a lot easier. Hang on. This is what we're going to do. Let's not save. Let me do a square. This is going to be a million times easier if I just keep it super simple in this case. Okay, so let's say that you have a zone. Let's say you have a Zone 1 here. You have a Zone 1 here. I'm just going to try and split this up like even, so it's not going to be proportionate, but you'll get the point here. Let's just say this was your 4 Zone 1s that you have, okay? And we'll go, oops, hang on. I don't want to do that. Let's go back to the brush, right? Zone 1, Zone 1, Zone 1. Okay, now, from here, you could say that you can have a dedicated, still, bear in mind, right? So let's go back here, and we're going to go red. Let's say this is, oops, I have to go right here. So let's say this is your Zone 2, okay? So here's your Zone 2, right? Here's your Zone 2. Here's your Zone 2. And again, bear in mind, I'm not like fitting to scale, right? And then let's say that now this is your zone 3. Right? And I probably should have extended this red one out a little bit more. Let's just say it goes all the way here. So what you're doing by this is you're allowing a dedicated starting region, right? And then you're allowing for people to go into zone 2, but then they can also fight here. Now, you could also say, if you wanted to, that you could have another dedicated area here, right? And again, I realize I'm like overdrawing at this point. I probably should have set this up from the beginning. But let's just say you want it like this. So you have these purple areas that are your neutral, adjacent Zone 1 PvP fields, very similar to what they did in S1+. And so you have these that you allow. So you have every home kingdom a starting region. Then you allow for the neutrals areas to be filled or to be occupied, very similar to how they were in S1+, where maybe you have some behemoths in there. You allow people to try and go in and build out. And then you can fight. Okay, cool. Right? And then they can still have access to zone 2, and then they can fight over another neutral zone. And then you just keep rinsing and repeating it all the way to where basically it culminates to zone 4. And then once you get, or zone 3 or zone 4, whatever the ending zone is, right? Everything kind of culminates there. And then once zone 4 is occupied in a week or a week and a half or something go by, then you can say, right, we will unlock the home. Now, I want to preface this by saying, like, the home starting region. I want to preface this. The only way I believe that the starting region should be unlocked is if you have a home kingdom that you could go back to, right? So those that want to stay and fight can. Those that don't want to stay and fight can go back to the home kingdom. Otherwise, if you are not going to bring home kingdoms into the game, then I do not believe that players should be subjected to just basically getting constantly barraged by unlocking the starting zone 1 regions, to where those that just want to go and farm merits can just basically beat them to a pulp over and over and over again, where all they're going to do is force TP to somewhere else in that same zone 1 region. That doesn't really do a lot for the game, because all you're doing is just providing punching bags, right? There has to be some type of incentive or value, right? You want people to stay for the right reasons. So again, that's how I see it when it comes to some of the biggest areas that really impact the game at the moment that I feel really need to be addressed. And I'll probably be coming out with, some type of suggestions for some of these other ones. But I just wanted to point out how something like this situation with the whole TFS, the MT, the buying accounts to try and spice things up, the 5, and bear in mind, I was just scratching the surface. Those 5 points that I just talked about is not everything that's involved in this, right? Those to me are just 5 of the more leading causes of why you see actions like these being done when it comes to this idea or the thought behind, things aren't spicy enough. We're not having enough PvP, or there's not enough action that's happening. It's because in large part, the game, part of it really, I think in large part really does come down to how the developers are designing the maps, and then also how are they really systematically filling the kingdoms? What's the focus of the game? Like, the things that I talked about are really all factored in. It's all connected at the end of the day. And this is something that I would love to really get across to more players, so you understand why these types of actions are being done, the reasoning behind them, and then how almost everything is pretty much connected to how the beginning of a game is, what the impression of the game is to the player base, how the developers are talking about the game to the player base, what's the functionality, what options do we have in game. There really are so many connected dots here. And it's one of the most fascinating things that I love talking about, because this is something that I have just spent a long time learning and educating myself and researching and asking questions and just coming to a higher level understanding of that kingdom builders are so much more than what some players may just perceive them at, which is just war games, right? And it's one of the reasons I love this genre so much. With that in mind, that is going to do it for me. Again, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see where I'm coming from? Do you not? Did I illuminate? If anything, I just confirm your hypotheses, if you will, already? And just generally let me know. I'm curious. So with that being in mind, also, right? If you are a part of the TFS, the MT situation, you want to provide some more clarity, I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments below. That's why I didn't really go too hard on the specifics here. I kind of did more of a broad and kind of vague approach to it. And that's just because I haven't had time to really go and talk to a lot of individuals from both sides outside of what I've heard from multiple sources. So that's why it was more generalized and kind of using it as a segue from context to then lead into what some of these leading causes are, right, that kind of get us to talking about this type of a topic. Alrighty, that's going to do it for me. As always, until next time, I will catch you later.